I stood on the porch of my childhood home, feeling the rain wash away the tears from my face. The wind picked up the hem of my light jacket, throwing my wet hair into my eyes, but I didn't even move to remove the wet strands. Behind me was the closed door of my parents' house, where I was no longer welcome. Inside were the people who had just wiped out 32 years of my history with one sentence. My phone vibrated again in my pocket. The fifth call from Wendy in the last 10 minutes. My little sister was probably hysterical, but I couldn't talk. Not now. Not with my father's words still ringing in my ears like a funeral bell. You are dead to us. Forget that you have a family. My body moved automatically. I got to the car, started the engine, and drove forward, not realizing where I was going. The tires rustled on the wet asphalt. The wipers loudly cut through the jets of water on the windshield. Everything was so sharp, vivid, and at the same time unreal, as if I were in someone else's life, and it all started with a simple announcement at dinner. That evening, I came to my parents' house for a traditional Saturday night gathering that my mother had instituted to maintain family ties after I moved into my own apartment 6 years ago. Usually, these dinners were tense, with my father asking about my work, frowning when I couldn't boast of another promotion, my mother quietly setting the dishes and trying to smooth out the sharp edges, and Wendy sitting with her eyes fixed on her plate. But that evening, everything was going to be different. I had made a decision that had been brewing in me for years. A week ago, I had resigned from my position as a middle manager at Shelton and Partners, the financial services firm where I had worked since graduation. I was about to announce that I was going to open a small bakery, a business I had dreamed of since I was a teenager. "Are you okay, honey?" my mother Sybil asked me as I took too long to pick at my casserole with my fork. I took a deep breath. "Actually, I have some news," I began, feeling my heartbeat quicken. I quit Shelton and Associates. The silence that fell around the table was almost tangible. "I'm sorry, what?" My father slowly put down his fork. His face began to turn that characteristic red hue that appeared whenever something was out of his control. "I quit my job, Dad. It's been a decision that's been brewing for a long time, but just what?" His voice sounded too calm, and that was the worst sign of all. "You just decided to throw away 10 years of your career?" "It's not a whim." I tried to sound firm, even though I could feel my hands shaking. "I've decided to open my own bakery." My mom let out a soft gasp. Wendy looked up from her plate. "A bakery," my father repeated, as if I had said something ridiculous. "You want to sell cupcakes with a degree in finance? It's what I've always wanted." I tried to smile. "Remember when I used to bake for all the charity bake sales in high school? How I won that contest." "That's childish, Mallory." My father slammed his palm on the table and the glasses clinked. "Grown-ups don't give up a stable career to sell cakes. I didn't pay for your education so you could become a pastry chef." He said the last word with such contempt, as if it were the worst kind of curse. "Read, please," my mother said quietly, but her voice was lost in my father's angry tirade. "It's not just selling cakes," I tried to explain, feeling anger and pain building in my chest. "It's going to be a real business. I've developed a business plan, calculated all the costs and risks, using what you learned in college." My father interrupted with a bitter laugh. "At least something from your education came in handy for your adventure?" "It's not an adventure." "Then what is it? A midlife crisis? Or maybe you met some hipster who messed with your head?" My father raised his voice, then suddenly dropped it to a dangerous whisper. "Are you going to ruin everything again, like you did with Dexter?" The mention of my ex-fiancé made me feel like I'd been electrocuted. "This is different, and you know it." I could barely keep my voice from trembling. All I know is that you keep making bad choices. First, you dumped a great guy 2 months before the wedding. Now you're throwing your career down the toilet. When are you gonna grow up, Mallory? I'm 32 years old, Dad. I slowly rose from the table, feeling something inside me break. And this is my life. I didn't ask for your permission. I just told you about my decision. The silence that followed my words was worse than a scream. My father looked at me as if he saw me for the first time. His eyes narrowed and his lips pressed into a thin line. Your life? He finally said quietly. Then go and live it. But without us. What? My voice betrayed me, turning into a soft squeak. You heard me? He stood up, resting his palms on the table. If you can so easily reject everything we've taught you, all the sacrifices we've made for your future, then maybe you don't need us either. Reed, my mother stood up, but he gestured for her to stop. I've put up with her whims, her selfishness, her rebellion for so many years. It is enough. He turned to me, and I saw nothing but icy contempt in his eyes. You are dead to us. Forget that you have a family. I felt the floor shake under my feet. The air thickened, and I couldn't breathe. Somewhere nearby, Wendy sobbed. My mother opened and closed her mouth silently, like a fish washed up on the shore. You can't, I began, but my father interrupted me. I can. I already did. Take your things and go. I looked back at my mother for support, but she looked away. Wendy sat with her hands over her face. My family. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Okay, I somehow found my voice, even though it sounded like it was from far away. If that's what you want to hear, fine. I turned and walked out of the dining room, heading up to my old room. There was hardly anything left there, a few books, an old framed photo, a sweater I'd forgotten the last time I'd been there. I packed these little things into a bag without realizing what I was doing. My body moved automatically, as if on autopilot. When I went downstairs, the house was eerily silent. I heard muffled voices from the living room. I think my mom was crying. I froze at the door, waiting. For what? For an apology? For my father to come out and say that he had made a mistake? For my mom to finally take my side? Nothing happened. I opened the front door and walked out into the rainy evening. And now I was driving on an empty road, not knowing where I was going. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a message. Mel, please answer. He didn't mean it. Come back, we'll fix this. I'm worried. Wendy? A minute later, another came in. Mom's crying. Dad is locked in his office. Please, let's talk. I pulled over to the side of the road and finally let my tears flow. Sobs burst out of my chest like something alive that had been trying to get out for a long time. I cried until I was hoarse, until all the tears dried in my eyes. And then came a strange feeling of emptiness, and after it, peace. For the first time in many years, I did not feel the burden of parental expectations. I didn't have to try to be someone I wasn't. I didn't have to pretend that I was living my life when in fact I was walking someone else's path. I could be myself, even if the price for that was too high. My phone vibrated again. I looked at the screen. Wendy for the third time in the last 5 minutes. Without hesitation, I turned off the phone and put it in the glove compartment. Then I turned on the engine and hit the road, now knowing where I was going. Home, to my apartment, to a new life that was starting today. When I woke up in my apartment, I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Last night's dinner seemed like a nightmare. If not for the things carelessly thrown in the corner of the room, I could have convinced myself that nothing had happened. My hand automatically reached for my phone to check the time, but I remembered that I had turned it off yesterday. Now, turning on the device, I saw 27 missed calls and 13 messages. From Wendy. Please call me back. Mel, where are you? Mom's worried. We're all worried. The last message, are you even alive? I put the phone down without answering. What could I say? Yes, I'm alive, but I'm dead to you, remember? Instead, I got out of bed and did what I always did when I needed to think. I started baking. As I kneaded the cinnamon roll dough, I let the memories flood in. My hands worked automatically, and my mind took me back many years. I was 8 when I first tried to bake something by myself. It was my mother's birthday. Early in the morning, everyone was still asleep. I found a recipe for apple muffins in an old cookbook and decided to surprise her. Of course, it was a disaster. I spilled flour everywhere, cracked 2 eggs past the bowl, and the muffins burned because I set the temperature wrong. My mother appeared in the kitchen, drawn by the smell of burning, but instead of scolding me, she just hugged me. What's going on here? My father's stern voice made us both flinch. Mallory wanted to surprise me for my birthday. My mother smiled, brushing my disheveled bangs off my forehead. My father looked around the kitchen, walked over to the oven, and looked at my muffins. His face expressed nothing but disappointment. If you take on something, you have to do it right. He looked at me coldly. Clean up this mess. I don't want this in my house. I finished those muffins. My mom pretended they were wonderful, but they were hard as a rock. And in the evening, my father brought a cake ordered from the bakery, and everyone pretended that my cupcakes did not exist. I didn't give up. I just started baking secretly when my father was not at home. My mother silently helped me clean up the traces of my culinary experiments, and then she began to teach me some of the secrets herself. Your grandmother made the best apple pie in the neighborhood, she said, showing me how to cut the butter for the dough. And her mother had her own small bakery. Really? My eyes lit up. Why don't we have a bakery? Mom paused for a moment, her gaze distant. Life doesn't always turn out the way we dream, dear. When I turned 12, I could already bake perfect buns and muffins, and by the time I was 15, I had mastered more complicated recipes. It's a hobby, Mallory, he would say when I brought home another diploma from school for winning a cooking competition. A nice one, but impractical. Look at me. I provide for my family steadily because I have a serious profession. In my senior spring of high school, I plucked up the courage to say that I wanted to go to culinary school. Don't even think about it, my father cut me off. You'll go to a normal college and get an education that will secure your future. But cooking won't provide you with a stable income. His voice didn't allow for objections. You'll work 12 hours a day for minimum wage, standing at the stove? Nonsense. You're a smart girl, Mallory. You can do better than that. What if that's what I want? I dared to ask. You don't know what you want. You're just a child. That night, I cried into my pillow, and my mom sat next to me, stroking my back. He just wants what's best for you, honey, she whispered. What's best for him, not for me, I sobbed. He just is. You can't change a person. I looked at her through my tears. And you? Were you able to become what you wanted? She looked away, and that was the most eloquent answer. I entered the University of Pennsylvania to study finance. I studied well, got high grades, and was in the student society. My father was proud. My mom was happy that I was doing what was right. Wendy looked at me with admiring eyes, planning to follow in my footsteps in a few years, and I felt empty. The only consolation was the small kitchen in the dormitory, where I experimented with dough and fillings at night when everyone was asleep. I baked cupcakes for charity fairs, pies for friends' birthdays, and cookies for librarians who always helped me find the right books. It was there, at one of these fairs, that I met Dexter Marlowe. Tall, with brown eyes and a wide smile, he bought 6 blueberry muffins from me and ate them all without leaving the counter. I've never had anything tastier, he said, licking his fingers. We started dating in our third year. Dexter was studying law and dreamed of owning his own firm. He was determined, serious, and responsible. My father approved of my choice as soon as he met him. You see, he said when we were driving back from Christmas dinner, where I introduced Dexter to the family for the first time. This is why it's important to choose the right people. This guy is going to go far. We got engaged 3 years after graduation. Dexter proposed in an expensive restaurant with a diamond ring and champagne. Everything was perfect. From the outside, I liked Dexter. He was kind, smart, reliable. But as the wedding approached, I started waking up at night, feeling panicked. Something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. The realization came 2 months before the wedding, when my mother and I were choosing flowers for the bouquet. How did you realize you wanted to spend the rest of your life with Dad? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Mom looked up from the catalog and stared straight ahead for a moment. You know, I'm not sure I've ever had that moment, she finally answered quietly. Your father was a good match. My parents approved of him. He offered stability. And then the years just went by, and you and Wendy were born, and it was too late to think about such things. But are you happy? She took my hand and squeezed it. I have you, my girls. You are my happiness. I realized I couldn't marry Dexter. It would be a repetition of my mother's fate, a life in a golden cage where someone else decided everything. No passion, no real joy. Of course, my father was furious when I broke off the engagement. He yelled that I was ruining my life, that I would never find anyone better than Dexter. My mom was crying. Wendy looked at me like I was a traitor, but I felt like I had finally done something right for myself. I got a job at Shelton and Partners to make peace with my father. It was a compromise deal. I was using my education, but at least I wasn't marrying someone I didn't love. My father accepted this choice as a temporary truce, and I started baking again in the evenings after work to avoid going crazy among the tables, reports, and forecasts. With a shudder, I came back to reality, realizing that the dough in my hands was already too hard. I put the buns in the oven and looked at the clock. It was 9 in the morning, Sunday. Normally, I would be preparing for a family dinner. Instead, I sat down at my desk with my laptop and started revising my business plan. For the past 6 months, I've been secretly looking for a bakery space, developing a menu, calculating costs, and studying the market. I even found the perfect place, a small space on the corner of Maple Street and Oak Avenue, with large windows and old-fashioned brickwork. Last week I signed the lease. The money I'd been saving for years, saving from every paycheck, was about to turn into my dream. It was scary and exciting at the same time. My phone rang again. Mel? Wendy's voice sounded tearful. You didn't answer. I thought, I'm fine, I said, trying to sound normal. I just needed time to think. Dad didn't mean what he said. He was just angry. No, Wendy, I interrupted. He meant every word of it. And you know what? I accept that. How can you say that? She sounded indignant now. We're a family. Families don't give up on each other. Tell that to your dad. I smiled bitterly, even though she couldn't see it. Look, I need time. I won't disappear forever. But right now, I need to focus on my own life. There was a silence, and I could almost feel her struggling to find the words. Is it because of that bakery? Are you really going to do it? Yes, I've already signed the lease. Wow, Wendy sounded impressed. You weren't kidding. No, I wasn't. So, what now? Now I'm going to do what I love, I replied, feeling warmth spread through my chest at the thought. Silence again. Can I, can I come over to see it? It caught me off guard. Wendy had always been a daddy's girl, obedient and correct. Sure, I said after a pause. I'll be there first thing tomorrow morning. The corner of Maple and Oak, the little green sign that says for rent. I'll be there at 10. And that was the end of the conversation. I put the phone down and took a deep breath. Maybe all was not lost. The next morning, I arrived at my future premises early. It looked abandoned, dust on the floor, cobwebs in the corners, bare walls. But I could see its potential. A display case with cakes by the window, small tables for visitors who would like to enjoy fresh pastries with coffee, an open kitchen where everyone could see the process of creating sweets. I started taking notes, figuring out where to place everything when I heard the bell above the door. Wendy? I turned around, but instead of my sister, I saw a strange man looking at me curiously. Excuse me, he said, looking around the room. I was looking for the owner. There's no owner here yet, just a tenant, I replied, holding out my hand. His palm was warm and rough. I own the Morning Owl across the street. Oh, yeah, I've seen it, I nodded. His was a cozy place with a vintage interior, and judging by the line every morning, great coffee. I heard there's a bakery coming. He looked around the place with professional interest. That's right. I hope to open in a month if everything goes according to plan. Great, he smiled, his green eyes sparkling. We lack a good bakery in the neighborhood. I try to order baked goods from different places, but the quality always suffers in transportation. Well, soon you'll be able to get everything fresh, right out of the oven. I felt my cheeks flush a little. That was the first time I talked about my bakery as something real, not just a dream. Sounds like the start of a great collaboration. Noel smiled again. Listen, if you need any help with repairs or equipment, let me know. I went through all of this 2 years ago when I opened Owl. Thank you. That's very kind of you. At that moment, the bell rang again, and Wendy entered the room. Mel, she said quietly, then noticed Noel and fell silent in embarrassment. Wendy, this is Noel Brenner, the owner of the coffee shop across the street. Noel, this is my sister, Wendy. Nice to meet you. Noel nodded but seemed to sense the tension between us. Here's my card, Mallory. Call me if you need any advice. After he left, Wendy sat down in the only chair in the room. Nice, she said, looking out the window at Noel's disappearing figure. I just met him, I replied, then came closer. You look terrible. Wendy put a hand to her face as if to hide the marks of a sleepless night. We've had a terrible week, Mel. Dad barely talks. Mom cries when she thinks no one can see her. That's their choice. I tried to sound firm, but I could feel something tightening in my chest. I didn't force anyone to give up on me. I know. Wendy suddenly looked very tired. You know, I've always envied you. What? Was the last thing I expected to hear. You've always had the courage to stand up for yourself. First with Dexter, now with this bakery. She gestured around the room. I could never have stood up to Dad like that. I don't know if it was courage or just desperation, I answered honestly. I just couldn't live someone else's life anymore. We sat in silence, each in our own thoughts. Finally, Wendy stood up. I have to go, she said. I have a meeting this afternoon. Thanks for coming. I hugged her, and she clung to me for a moment, like a child afraid of a thunderstorm. And keep your phone on, okay? The next week flew by in a blur. I was busy fixing up the place, ordering equipment, and working on the menu. Noel came by often, offering to help or just bringing coffee. His support was unexpected, but very nice. There was no news from my family, except for a few short messages from Wendy. I tried not to think about it, focusing on my work. Sometimes I succeeded. And then, exactly 1 week after that fateful dinner, my phone rang at 3 in the morning. I woke up abruptly, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. Mallory? Wendy's voice was barely audible, as if she were speaking through tears. Dad's in the hospital. He's had a heart attack. The doctors say he needs emergency surgery. Hospital corridors have always terrified me. The smell of antiseptic, muffled voices, people with empty eyes waiting for news, good or bad. But now I had no time for my fears. I almost ran down the long corridor to the intensive care unit where Wendy had told me to go. When the elevator stopped on the fourth floor, I saw my sister slouched in a plastic chair. She looked smaller than usual, as if she had shrunk from fear. My mom was sitting next to her face gray and her hands shaking. Mallory. Wendy stood up and hugged me. Thank you for coming. My mom looked up, and something like relief flashed in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. What happened? I asked, taking off my jacket. Dad was working late in his office. Wendy began, sitting down again. And Mom went to bed, and when she woke up in the night, she heard a noise. She found him on the floor. He couldn't breathe and was clutching his chest. And what do the doctors say? I tried to remain calm, although my voice was trembling slightly. A severe heart attack. He needs urgent surgery, something with his valve and bypass surgery. Wendy trailed off, her eyes wandering as if she were trying to remember medical terms. If they don't do the surgery, he could. She didn't finish her sentence, but she didn't need to. I sat down next to them, feeling a strange emptiness inside. A week ago, my father said I was dead to him, and now he was on the verge of death himself, and I was sitting here, waiting for news of his condition. Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes. Miss Kincaid, a doctor appeared next to us, a tall man with tired eyes. Are you related to Reed Kincaid? Yes, my mother replied, standing up. I'm his wife, and these are our daughters. I'm Dr. Phelps, a cardiac surgeon. He nodded to us all. Your husband's condition has been stabilized, but he needs surgery. The sooner the better. Do whatever you need to do, my mother said, wringing her hands. Okay, the doctor pulled out a clipboard. Then we need to discuss some details. Perhaps you would like to do it in private? We moved to a small room for visitors. There, the doctor explained that my father needed coronary artery bypass grafting and heart valve replacement. The operation is complicated, but without it, the chances of survival are minimal. Now, as for the financial issues, he turned a few pages on his tablet. Your husband's insurance covers most of the costs, but there are some aspects that it does not cover, in particular, the special valve that is needed in his case and some post-operative procedures. And how much will that cost? I asked, feeling my insides tighten with a bad feeling. About $120,000, the doctor replied. My mother paled even more, if that was possible. We have savings, she said uncertainly. How long do we have to pay for it? I asked. The sooner we can have the surgery, the better. I'd say within 48 hours. The doctor looked at his watch. I'll leave you two to discuss it. The nurse will give you all the necessary forms. When he left, the room fell into a heavy silence. We don't have that kind of money, Mom finally said, her voice sounding hollow. Not now. What do you mean? I turned to her. What about Dad's retirement account? He always said he was saving for emergencies. Mom looked down. He invested that money last year. He said he found a way to double our savings. And what happened? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He lost almost everything, Mom answered quietly. It went bankrupt. I felt anger building in my chest. It was typical of my father to risk everything for the idea of getting rich quick and then hide his failure. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. He didn't want anyone to know. Mom looked so small in her chair. I've never seen him like that. I think it might have affected his reaction to your bakery. Wendy, who had been silent all this time, suddenly looked up. What if we sold the house? She suggested. That would take too long, I replied. We don't have months. Wendy sounded confused, almost like a child. I felt all eyes on me, the oldest daughter, the one who always made all the decisions. I can borrow the money, my mother said slowly. Maybe the bank. No. My voice sounded sharper than I intended. The bank won't give you that kind of money without collateral, and even if they did, the interest would be huge. The room fell silent again. I knew everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one dared to say it out loud. My savings, the money I had been saving for years to open my own bakery, $145,000 that was supposed to be my ticket to freedom. Mallory, Wendy began, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said. I need to think. I walked out of the room, feeling each step harder than the last. Once in the corridor, I headed for the nearest exit. I needed some fresh air. The hospital courtyard was empty. Who would be walking at 5 in the morning? I sat down on a bench under a tree and took a deep breath of the cold morning air. I was facing the hardest choice of my life. I could give my money to save the life of my father, who had disowned me a week ago. A man who had never supported my dreams, who considered my desires to be whims, who demanded that I live by his rules. Or I could have saved the money and opened my bakery as I had planned, to realize my dream, to finally be myself. And my father, well, he would reap what he sowed with his bad investments. Wasn't that what he'd always preached? Actions have consequences, Mallory. Every decision has a price. Some part of me, a dark part hidden deep inside, whispered that it was true. Let her feel what it's like to be rejected in the most difficult moment. Let him understand how I felt when he said I was dead to him. But the other part, the part that still remembered him teaching me to ride a bike, praising me for my first A's, smiling proudly at my graduation, I pulled out my phone and called the only person I could talk to right now. I'm sorry to call you so early, but 20 minutes later, he was sitting next to me on the same bench, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thanks for coming, I said, taking the hot drink. No problem, he turned to me. Tell me what happened. And I told him everything about what my father had said a week ago, about his heart attack, about the cost of the surgery, and about my savings for the bakery. It's a terrible choice, Noel said when I finished. No one should have to be in that situation. The worst part is that I know what I'm going to do. I smiled bitterly. I won't be able to live with the idea that I could have saved his life and didn't. But it means giving up your dream, he said gently. He gave up on me, and now I have to sacrifice everything. Noel was silent for a while, then slowly said, What if there's another way? What? I turned to him. I don't know if this is appropriate to suggest, given that we've only known each other for a week, but he paused. I've been looking for a partner to expand the business. Morning Owl is doing well, and I was thinking of opening a second location. But I need someone who can manage the baking. You're offering me a job? I couldn't believe my ears. I'm offering a partnership, he replied. You can use your money for your father's surgery, and then we can join forces. Your bakery could become part of my coffee shop, or we could come up with something new together. We can start small, gradually grow. Why are you doing this? I interrupted him. Noel looked me straight in the eye. I've seen you talk about your bakery with such passion, and I tasted your baked goods. Those cinnamon rolls you brought to show me. They were the best I've ever had. You have a gift, Mallory. It would be a crime not to let it develop. I felt something warm spread through my chest, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. I need time to think about it, I said. Of course, he nodded. But know that the offer is valid. No matter what you decide today. When I returned to the hospital, the sun was already rising. In the small visiting room, my mom was sleeping, curled up uncomfortably in a chair. Wendy was sitting next to her, flipping through a magazine. Where have you been? She asked when I walked in. I needed to think, I replied, sitting down across from her. Wendy jumped up and hugged me. Thank you, Mel. I knew you wouldn't leave us. I'm not doing this for you, I said gently, or for Dad. Who is? For me, I said honestly, so I can move on with my life without this burden. Wendy was about to say something, but at that moment my mom woke up. Mallory? She looked disoriented. You're back. Yes, I nodded. And I'm paying for Dad's surgery. Mom cried, putting her hand over her mouth. We'll pay you back, I promise. Somehow. We'll find a way. It's not a loan, Mom. I interrupted her. But I have conditions. She looked at me through her tears, and I saw fear in her eyes. I don't want Dad to know where the money came from, I said firmly. He can't know that I paid for his surgery. But why? Wendy wondered. Don't you want him to know that you helped? No, I shook my head. I don't want him to feel obligated. I don't want his gratitude to be another way to control me. He's not like that, my mom protested weakly. He is. I looked her straight in the eye. And you know it, Mom. You just never admitted it. She looked away, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I had said out loud what we had all been silent about for years, about how controlling my father was, about how he manipulated us all, using his love as a weapon. The second condition, I continued, is that after he recovers, we all sit down and talk. We're going to have a real talk about everything that has happened in our family over the years, about how it has affected each of us. He will never agree, my mom said quietly. Then that will be his choice, I replied. But I won't be silent anymore, Mom, and neither should you. My mom stared into her hands. Her shoulders shook, and I didn't know if she was crying or just trying to hold back her emotions. You're so strong, she finally said, not looking up. How are you? I asked again, feeling something change in the air between us. Before I met your father, she looked up, and I saw something new in her eyes, a distant light, like a glimpse of the woman she once was. I wanted to be an artist. I even had a scholarship to art school. I didn't know, I whispered. No one did, she smiled faintly. My parents thought it was a waste of time. They introduced me to your father, a promising accountant with a good future, and I chose to play it safe. I gave up my scholarship. I got married, gave birth to you, and I don't regret it. I never did. But part of you always thought about what could have been. I finished for her. She nodded, and tears rolled down her cheeks. When you were little and started baking, I saw in you the same passion, the same spark that I once had. And I didn't want you to lose it like I did. But I was too weak to protect you from your father. I took her hand, feeling my heart fill with a new understanding. You're not weak, Mom. You just made a different choice. The wrong choice. She squeezed my hand. I let him control not only my life, but yours as well. I saw how he pressured you through the university, through Dexter, through everything. It's not your fault, I said. You did what you thought was right. But now I know I was wrong. She straightened up, as if to lift a heavy weight from her shoulders. I promise, when we have that conversation, I'll be right there with you. Somehow, in that sterile hospital corridor, amidst the fear and uncertainty, we found something new. A thread of understanding that began to connect us in a new way. Wendy, who had been silently watching our conversation, suddenly said, Me too. I'll be here for you. We were all three of us sitting there holding hands when Dr. Phelps walked in. We're ready to start preparing for the surgery, he said. I'll pay for everything, I said firmly, standing up. Let's get the paperwork done. When we left the room, my mom stopped me for a moment. Thank you, she said quietly, not just for the money. We all needed to see the light, I replied, squeezing her hand. And it seems it took almost losing Dad to do it. The surgery lasted almost 8 hours. 8 hours, during which my mom, Wendy, and I sat in the waiting room, not daring to speak, as if words might upset the delicate balance between life and death. When Dr. Phelps finally came out to us, a slight smile lit up his tired face. The surgery was successful, he said. Mr. Kincaid is in stable condition, although his rehabilitation will be lengthy. My mom burst into tears. Wendy hugged her, and I just stood there, feeling the tension in my shoulders gradually release. He was going to live. No matter what I thought of my father, no matter how difficult our relationship had been, the relief of this news was genuine. "When can we see him?" I asked. "He's under anesthesia now and will sleep for a few more hours." The doctor put his hand on my shoulder. "Go home and get some rest. Tomorrow will be a hard day." I drove my mom and Wendy to my parents' house, but I refused to stay. "I have to take care of something," I said, without getting out of the car. "I'll come back tomorrow morning." "Is everything okay?" My mom looked at me with concern. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." I smiled weakly. "We'll talk tomorrow." I didn't go home, but to the place that was to become my bakery. Standing in the middle of the empty room, I tried to imagine what it might look like: cozy tables, a display case with pastries, the smell of fresh buns. But now, without money, it all seemed distant and unattainable. I didn't regret my decision. My father's life was more important than any dream. But the pain of losing something that hadn't even been born yet was real. "I knew I'd find you here." Noel walked in holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "How's your father?" "The surgery was successful." I took the offered drink. "Thank you for asking." "And how are you?" He looked at me carefully. "Honestly, I don't know." I circled the empty space with my hand. It was supposed to be something special, my own place. "It can still be yours." Noel sat down on the windowsill. "I'm serious about the partnership, Mallory. In fact, I've been thinking about it all day." "What do you have in mind?" "I want to remodel the Morning Owl into a full-fledged bakery. Not just a coffee shop with a few pastries, but a real place where people could buy your buns, pies, bread." He spoke with an enthusiasm that was infectious. "We can start small, with the equipment we already have, gradually expanding, and when things go well, we can return to the idea of a separate bakery." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, feeling something like hope emerge in my chest. "Because I believe in you," he answered simply, "and also because my customers have been talking about your cinnamon rolls that I've started selling for 2 days now." "You're selling my rolls?" I looked at him in surprise. "The ones you brought me to try last week. I asked if I could offer them to visitors, and you said yes, remember?" He smiled. "They were gone in an hour. People asked when there would be more. I didn't know what to say." Amidst the chaos of the last few days, this small victory seemed especially precious. "I'll think about your offer," I finally said, "but right now I need to focus on my father." "Of course," he nodded. "The offer stands." No time limit. For the next 2 weeks, I was torn between the hospital and the rest of my life. My father was slowly recovering, moving from intensive care to a regular ward. He hardly spoke, answering the doctor's questions in short phrases and avoiding any talk about what had happened. He did not ask where the money for the surgery came from. Wendy told him it was his and his mom's savings, and he seemed to believe it, or didn't have the strength to doubt it. When I would come over, he would look at me with a strange expression, a mixture of surprise, awkwardness, and something I couldn't decipher. Usually, I just sat next to him, sometimes telling him the news, sometimes just in silence. He never asked me to leave, but he didn't show much joy in my presence either. Instead, my mom changed before my eyes. At first, it was small things. She started to express her opinion to the nurses when she thought they were doing something wrong. Then she surprised us all by bringing a sketchbook to the hospital. I decided to try again, she said, as Wendy and I looked at her questioningly. It helps to think. I noticed her father watching her with an unusual expression as she sat by the window, sketching the view of the hospital garden. He didn't say anything, but his gaze changed. It became more attentive, as if he was actually seeing his wife for the first time in many years. One evening, when Wendy and I were left in the hallway, waiting for Mom to finish talking to the doctor, my sister suddenly took my hand. You know, all my life I wanted to be like you, she said quietly. Like me? I looked at her in surprise. That's why, she sighed. I was afraid to disappoint him, afraid to do something wrong. So I always did what was expected of me. And you? You've always been brave, even when it cost you his approval. That's not courage, Wendy. I squeezed her hand. That's desperation. When you realize you can't keep living someone else's life, even if it means disappointing everyone you love. I can't do it anymore either. Her voice trembled. What? I couldn't believe my ears. But Dad doesn't know. She looked down. I told him I was taking a leave of absence because of stress, but in reality, I'm applying to art college. I always wanted to do interior design. I looked at my younger sister, who suddenly seemed so much older. Well, it seems we both got our creative spirit from our mom. I smiled. And her fear of our dad, Wendy added bitterly, although that should change now. He looks so vulnerable now. Vulnerability won't change his character, I said, but maybe it's a chance for an honest conversation. 2 days later, that chance came. I came to the hospital late in the evening when visiting hours were already over. The nurse made an exception when she saw my tired face. Only for a little while, she warned. Your father needs to rest. I entered the room, not expecting to find my father alone. Usually my mother was with him until the last minute, but this time he was lying alone, looking out the window at the darkening sky. Dad? I called out softly. He turned his head, and I noticed that for the first time he didn't look away when he saw me. Mallory, his voice sounded hoarse. I didn't think you'd come in today. I've been busy. I sat down on the chair next to the bed. Like a man whose chest was cut open and put back together. He tried to smile, but it was more of a grimace. But the doctors say everything is going according to plan. We sat in an awkward silence. Normally, I would have started talking about something neutral, the weather, the news. But today, something inside me didn't allow me to continue this game. A week ago, you said I was dead to you. The words came out of me, and I didn't hold them back. And now I'm sitting here, by your hospital bed. He tensed, but didn't look away. I didn't ask you to come. No, I didn't, I agreed. Because, unlike you, I don't abandon people when they make choices I don't like. It's not fair. His voice trembled with anger, or perhaps pain. Unfair? I felt a wave of emotions that had been pent up for years rise inside me. It was unfair to give up my own daughter because she wanted to do what she loved. It was unfair to make her choose between her dream and her family. It was always unfair to make your approval a condition for love. I never. You always, I interrupted him. All my life I've been trying to earn your love. I went to the university you chose, worked at a job you approved of, dated guys you thought were right for me. And you know what? I was still never good enough. Ever. He was looking at me, and I couldn't read his expression, but I couldn't stop. The words were pouring out like a dam burst. Do you know why I broke off my engagement to Dexter? Because I realized that I was repeating my mother's fate. I was marrying a man who looked right on paper, but didn't make me happy. I didn't want to live my whole life asking myself, what if? I didn't want to wake up one day and realize that I was living someone else's life. Your mom, he started, But I interrupted him again. Mom gave up her dreams for you. She gave up art school, her career, everything that made her who she was. And you know what the worst part is? She didn't even think she had the right to regret it. For a moment, the room was silent. All I could hear was the sound of my heavy breathing and the steady beeping of the monitors. I wanted the best for you, my father finally said, his voice sounding unusually quiet. I wanted you to have a stable life. I wanted you not to know what it's like to count every cent, to be afraid that tomorrow you won't have enough to pay the rent. Is that what you went through? I asked more gently. He didn't answer, but his gaze became distant, as if he were looking somewhere in the past. I never told you about my childhood, he finally said. My father, your grandfather, he was a musician, talented but impractical. We never knew if there would be food on the table next week. Sometimes we were evicted from our apartments when he couldn't pay. My mom worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, and he kept promising that his big chance was just around the corner. I was silent, not knowing what to say. He had never talked about it before. When I turned 12, he left us. He said he needed freedom to be creative, that his family was holding him back. My father spoke evenly, but I could see his fingers clutching the blanket turning white. I swore to myself that I would never be like that my family would always be provided for, that my children would never know what it's like to go to bed hungry. Dad. So, yes, maybe I was too controlling, too insistent on the right way, but I just wanted to protect you from disappointment, from uncertainty, from, he stuttered, searching for words. From life? I finished quietly. He looked at me, and I saw something new in his eyes. Realization. Maybe, he agreed after a pause. Maybe I was so afraid that you would get hurt that I forgot to let you live. There was a knock at the door, and a nurse looked into the room. Visiting hours are over, she said. Mr. Kincaid needs to rest. I started to get up, but my father suddenly grabbed my arm. Leave us alone for a minute, please, he asked the nurse. We need to finish an important conversation. The nurse reluctantly nodded and left the room. My father and I were left alone, and the tension between us was almost palpable. I don't know where the money for my surgery came from, he finally said, looking me straight in the eye. But I'm not stupid, Mallory. I know your mom and sister didn't have that kind of money. I felt my heart skip a beat. He knew. It doesn't matter. I tried to brush it off. It does, he said, his voice tired but firm. You gave the money for your bakery to save the life of a man who said you were dead to him. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't do otherwise, I finally said. I know, he smiled weakly. You've always been a better person than me, kinder, more generous. It was so unlike him to admit his mistakes, let alone praise me for something that didn't fit his idea of success. Dad, I don't want you to feel guilty. I do, he interrupted me. And I should. What I said to you, I will never forgive myself for that. He was silent, collecting his thoughts. You know, when I was lying on the operating table, thinking I might not wake up, I wasn't sorry for the money I lost or the unfinished projects at work. I regretted the fact that I might die without ever reconciling with you. His eyes filled with tears, and it struck me more than any words. I had never seen my father cry. I was a terrible father, he continued. I thought I was protecting you by insisting on the right way. But in reality, I was just afraid. I was afraid that if I let go of control, everything would fall apart. That you'd make the same mistakes my father did and suffer like I did. But we're different people, Dad, I said softly, with different dreams, different paths. I realize that now. He took a deep breath. Mallory, I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that you were never, ever dead to me. Even as I said those terrible words, I knew it was a lie. I felt tears rolling down my cheeks. Something was healing in me. Not completely, not immediately, but the process had begun. I need time, Dad, I said honestly. I can't just forget everything that happened between us. I know, he nodded. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to be a better father, a better man. He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. This simple gesture seemed to be the beginning of something new between us, not a perfect reconciliation, but an opportunity for something more real, more honest. I'll try, I promised. 3 months passed. My father returned home from the hospital and was slowly recovering. He changed. He became quieter, less categorical. Sometimes I noticed him looking at my mother with a strange expression, as if he was seeing her for the first time. One evening, when I came to visit them, my mother met me at the door with a beaming face. He said he was proud of me, she whispered, leading me into the living room. I showed him my drawings, and he said I was talented. There was an easel in the corner of the room, a real professional one, not the cheap sketchbook she'd started with in the hospital. He gave it to me yesterday, she explained, catching my eye. That evening, as we sat at dinner, my father, Mother Wendy, and I, my mother suddenly put down her fork and looked at her husband seriously. I want to sign up for the art class, Reed, she said firmly. Wendy and I held our breaths, waiting for my father's reaction. In the past, he would have dismissed the idea as nonsense, a waste of time. If that's what you want, Sybil, he said simply, you've been putting off your wishes for too long. Mom burst into tears right there at the table, and Wendy put her arm around her shoulders, and I looked at my father and saw something new in his eyes, a mixture of pity, tenderness, and determination to do the right thing this time. Meanwhile, my own affairs were moving forward. I accepted Noel's offer of partnership. We decided not to expand Morning Owl, but instead to turn it into Owl and Cinnamon, a cafe and bakery combining his coffee expertise with my baking skills. The first weeks were exhausting. We worked from dawn until late at night, re-equipping the kitchen, creating a new menu, and training the staff. But the joy of creating something with our own hands was worth every sleepless night. Noel and I became closer in the process. At first, it was just touching hands while passing tools, then long conversations after closing, when we sat among empty tables with glasses of wine, discussing plans for the future. And then, one evening, when I was trying a new chocolate cake recipe, he just walked over, brushed a strand of flowery hair out of my face, and kissed me. I've been waiting for this since that first meeting in the empty room, he admitted. The opening day of Owl and Cinnamon was one of the happiest and scariest days of my life. Noel and I stood at the entrance, watching the first customers come inside, inhale the aroma of fresh pastries and coffee, and admire the decor we had so carefully thought out. Wendy was the first to arrive with a group of her new friends from art college. She had officially moved out of her parents' house 2 weeks ago, renting a small apartment near campus. That's incredible, Mel. She hugged me, her eyes shining. I'm so proud of you. My mom and dad showed up later in the afternoon. Dad was moving slowly, still not fully recovered from his surgery, but he insisted on coming despite Mom's protests. I wouldn't have missed this day, he said, looking around the room with obvious delight. He picked up a cake from the display case, took a bite, and froze. This is the best pastry I've ever tasted, he said with genuine surprise. I didn't know you were so talented. I've been baking all my life, Dad, I reminded him, but without the bitterness. Yes, but I've never really tried. He looked me in the eye. I didn't want to admit that you were right and I was wrong. Those simple words meant more to me than any lengthy apology. 6 months later, Owl and Cinnamon became one of the most popular coffee and bakery shops in the neighborhood. Noel and I talked about the possibility of opening a second location, as well as turning the top floor of the building into our shared apartment. Our relationship developed naturally and easily, without pressure or rush. My mother opened a small exhibition of her work in a local gallery, simple but sincere landscapes and still lifes. Her father stood next to her at the opening, holding her hand with a pride that could not be hidden. Wendy was finishing her first year of study with honors and had already received an offer of an internship at a design firm. She blossomed, free from the shadow of her parents' expectations, finding her own path. One Sunday evening, almost a year after that fateful family dinner that changed everything, we got together again. But this time, not at my parents' house, but at my bakery. Noel had closed the place to the public, and we had a private dinner. To new beginnings, my father raised his glass as we all sat down at the table. And to the courage to be yourself, my mother added, exchanging an understanding look with me. We didn't become a perfect family. There were still moments of tension between us, understatements, old wounds that sometimes made themselves felt, but we became more honest with each other, more real. After dinner, when my parents and Wendy left, Noel and I stayed to clean up. I stood by the window, watching them walk down the street, my father walking slowly, leaning on my mother's arm, Wendy gesturing, saying something enthusiastically. "What are you thinking about?" Noel put his arms around me from behind, pulling me close. "About how strange everything has turned out," I replied, covering his arms with mine. "And now I have both, just in a different form." "Life rarely goes according to plan," he kissed my neck. "But sometimes improvisation is better than the original script." I turned to him, feeling my heart fill with gratitude for everything that had happened, even the pain, even the losses. "Do you know what I realized?" I said, looking into his eyes. "Sometimes you need to die in an old role in order to be born in a new, authentic one." Dad said that I was dead to him, and in a way it was true. That obedient girl who always sought his approval really died that night, and in her place was a woman who had finally found the courage to be herself. "And this woman is incredible." Noel touched my face gently. "I'm falling in love with her more and more every day." "Really?" I couldn't help but smile. "Absolutely." He kissed me, and I tasted cinnamon and coffee, our shared taste, the taste of our life together. Later, as we walked up the stairs to the apartment above the bakery, I thought about all the roads that had led me here, about all the choices I had made, about all the moments of despair and hope, and I realized that I wouldn't change a thing, even the most painful moments, even the words that broke my heart a year ago. Because sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the greatest healing. Sometimes you have to lose something precious to find something priceless. And sometimes, to find your true self, you have to first die for someone else. I closed the door behind us, leaving behind all the memories of the past. A new life was ahead. Not perfect, but real. My own life, according to my own rules. And for the first time in many years, I felt truly alive.